So something that some other people may not really have to deal with is the fact that in South Africa, we've got more people joining. Hi everyone. um, I've just gotten a notification on my phone that says that load shedding has been set to start. And load shedding in South Africa is essentially planned rolling blackouts. So we get the fantastic news that at any point in the next 5 days, our electricity will just be cut out randomly for 2 hours at a time, and we get to sort of try to work around that. But that is one of the pitfalls of game development in South Africa, is really trying to work around these quite trying and challenging technical things that I think other development companies maybe don't really have to deal with. And we just have to go with solar power where we can. We go with diesel power. The first Stasis game was actually there's a big chunk of it was actually made on a diesel generator, which I think was quite unique, and actually served a lot of inspiration behind A Beautiful Desolation, having a post-apocalyptic game set in post-apocalyptic Africa, and a lot of the technology there is all based around sort of diesel and petrol, very diesel steampunky sort of thing. Okay, so I think that we are officially live in the developer chat. I'm going to say start us a new game here, and let's get this show on the road. I'll just let this part of the intro play. Something that some people, if you were here for the last developer chat, I'm probably going to be repeating a lot of what I said. So the intro to the game was rendered in Unreal 5. In all of our previous games, we've actually used V-Ray and 3D Studio Max to do all of our animations. But after seeing the power of Unreal 5 and its for real-time rendering, it was definitely a no-brainer for us to switch to it for our cinematic sequences.
Stationary vessel in position. 23 degrees 10 decimal 45 minutes south. 71 degrees 18 decimal 41 minutes west. This is salvage barge Kilo Delta Kilo 12 calling on VH channel 16. Over.
Nothing on the AIS.
Nothing.
Keep trying.
Of course, we have the idea of opening up on the absolute classic sci-fi trope
45 minutes south. 71 degrees 18 decimal 41 minutes west.
of the unknown signal that comes, and our intrepid heroes have to go and figure out what is going on, what would have caused the signal, that then leads us into the story. But there could be more going on that we only find out as the story unfolds.
Oil rig. This is salvage barge Kilo Delta Kilo 12 calling on VH.
So when we did the very, very first intro to Bone Totem, I love this part.
It's a Keen Corp rig.
I think that the total rendering time to get it done and animation was something close to maybe about 3 or 4 weeks, and I managed to do this intro in Unreal in about 3 or 4 days. Luckily I had a lot of the assets already from previous, so that did definitely help, but it just shows the power. Just shows the power of Unreal 5.
Oh, rope's tied off. And rain's letting up a bit.
And the foxhounds are live and sniffing.
You think these mapping drones are worth it?
Oh, Frankie used them on his last salvage. Saved him 3 days of paperwork.
I still think they take away the fun with searching the unknown. Foxhound mapping network connected. I'ma head on to the rig shortly.
Hey, before you head out, let me sync up quantum storage devices. Is yours active?
quantum storage device shared storage is now concurrent.
Yep, but I still can't find the spare.
Oh, it's on Moses. Needed its battery.
Smart. That's my girl.
So Zona on deck. What hardware do I use for the rendering? So the computer. So in my majority of my development, I actually use a Dell XPS 15. But when we needed to switch over to Unreal 5 for rendering, I sort of took the dive and bought a nice big heavy desktop. So I do have a 3090 that handles the majority of whatever I can throw at Unreal in real time. And while I do render at HD, it actually could render the entire thing at 4K without any issues. I haven't been able to sort of max out the computer, that render card just yet, but as I go on in development, I'll see if I can get it to slow down, but it really is an absolute beast. The rest of the machine is, we sort of like, we bought the card and then very much built the machine around the card. So I've got an SSD in it, a lot of storage space, and just sort of as much CPU power and RAM power as we could afford at the moment. The computer does, however, come with one of those glass sides, which I don't know why computers have glass sides. I know people want to show off their hardware, but if I could, I would just lock it away in a safe in a cupboard somewhere. I don't need all the RGB lighting and the rest of it. I'm also, as we go along, I've got some other questions that people have asked in our Discord before, people have asked in email and on social media. So as you guys ask questions live, I'll definitely answer them, and we'll definitely go through some of the questions that other people have asked over the time being. One of the questions that was asked was, how does Bone Totem fit into the Stasis universe? So something that we always that we tried to do with Stasis was sort of a
These can't be right.
I'll try to stop talking whenever the characters talk, just so we don't get too confused. I always saw Stasis as an anthology, as sort of a way to sort of tell stories in a cool science fiction world. So for Bone Totem, it takes place, we do reference a lot of the events that have happened in the other two Stasis games, but it is a story that can be played entirely separately without playing those other games. But if you do play them, you'll get a bit of insight into the world. Chronologically speaking, this does happen after Stasis and after Kane. In terms of exactly how long, it'll probably be a few years afterwards, and the results of John's endeavors on Stasis, which I won't ruin Stasis, so I won't get into exactly what happened.
That's a whole lot of nothing out there.
Yeah, lucky we picked up that ping. Else we'd be heading back empty-handed. Again.
But definitely, what happened with the Groom Lake and with John's story has affected the world and has affected Kane.
See. Radio check, video check, vitals check.
Blue Sky Systems plug suit is active. All systems are nominal.
I hear you. You seeing what I'm seeing?
Mm-hmm. Plug suit is live. Signal is good.
I don't think this was scheduled. Too much equipment left behind.
So the game will takes the sort of what happened in Stasis definitely has quite a large effect on the world of Bone Totem in terms of where is Kane Corporation, why have they actually set the space up the way that they actually have, and all the different sort of political infighting that happened. I love the idea of these massive megalithic sci-fi corporations and the weird politics that goes on inside them, and how you get these kind of like huge cyberpunk organizations and that really do try to sort of take over the world. Something that I'm very proud of, and I'll do a little look here, is the PDAs in the game. We have lots of PDAs, and instead of just having them kind of be generic, we tried to make certain that each of the PDAs is sort of customized to the personality of the person who you're actually reading about. So that while the general layout is the same, obviously, an iPad is an iPad, but the idea that they all have these sort of custom shells that just have a bit of personality with the people whose PDAs you are actually reading. Yes, the glass side is nice for showing my kids the past. That is true. I sort of grew up in the idea of computers essentially being just large, beige blocks. And I do remember the first time I actually got to open a computer and look inside it. And it really is quite a thing to actually see. It's sort of like seeing the inside of a car for the first time.
That's a long way down.
17.5 meters.
I can make that.
No, Charlie, it's too dangerous. I'll find another way across.
So yeah, sort of getting the idea of looking at the inner workings of a car. But of course, nowadays at night I'll go and I'll turn the lights off in my office, and there's just this like neon glow streaming from the side of my office where the computer is actually sitting. And all I want to do is sort of like throw a blanket over it so I can actually sort of get a bit of darkness in the office. But it is actually quite nice to sort of see how it is. But I wouldn't say no to just at least like an option of like a metal panel to just glue over the side of the computer. Another question. PDAs look very fun to look at. Thank you very much. I think they're that was some of my favorite little bits of design to actually do, and actually sort of hand designed all the graffiti that goes on them. And there's these sort of recurring themes of cartoon characters that will go throughout the game where you'll see people have drawn them and that. And I like that little bit of world building. Somebody else asked, what software do you use to make the game? So while we did use Unreal for the actual rendering of these cinematics,
All this equipment, why would they leave it?
Yeah, well, their loss, our gain. This is how we get out from everything. It's our new start.
I know, you're right. I'm just being cautious.
so we use Unreal for the cinematics, but the actual game itself is all done in Unity. Nick is a Unity wizard, and it's actually one of the reasons why we
Budge.
Yeah, rig this size, those bulkheads are magnetically sealed.
one of the reasons why we really sort of use we sort of focus on 2D games is Nick actually gets quite a bit of motion sickness sometimes in even just playing 3D games. And Unity is really, really good in sort of, using, the 2D rendering of Unity is pretty crazy. So we can get these really big, high-quality backgrounds. I mean, some of these backgrounds are sort of 5K, 6K, even 8K big. And you can render them without sort of much issue in Unity.
Explains why we didn't pick up any radio chatter.
Which I really sort of
It's behind
can
bars
appreciate
over
the
there.
fact that Unity can actually handle that amount of
Coming up.
graphical stuff pushed at it. Because usually, to do 3D games and versus 2D games, to get sort of like very, very high quality 2D backgrounds, it can be quite challenging from a computational level. Then as an artist, I use 3D Studio Max. I've been a Max user since sort of the DOS days of 3D Studio. So definitely quite a while, since before it was called 3D Studio Max and was just called 3D Studio back in the Kinetics days. I sort of, it's actually quite strange to look at the software because I don't even see the buttons anymore. I just sort of am so used to just like how everything works. So I can work pretty quickly inside Max. And then for the actual rendering engine inside Max, I use V-Ray for all of my rendering. And then texture work is, I use PaintShop Pro, Corel PaintShop Pro, which I know a lot of people use Photoshop. And Photoshop really is an amazing piece of software, but I've been using PaintShop Pro, Corel. I've been using Corel PaintShop Pro since before they were Corel PaintShop Pro, and they were just it was just PaintShop Pro. It's also just a wonderful, small, easy and fast to use piece of software. So here I actually want to show one of the things that we tried to add into Bone Totem to make it a bit different from other adventure games. Obviously, in most adventure games, you get objects and items, and you can actually use them and combine them in your puzzle solving. So what we actually have is, because we have multiple characters in multiple parts of the game, we actually had decided to give our characters these special skills. So Charlie can actually use her engineering skill to combine certain things together in the puzzle solving. So it's not just the idea of like, oh, any character that can go and do this. You have to actually have access to Charlie to be able to use certain combinations. And then something I'll show you a bit later is how Mac can actually use his special ability, which is either transforming or breaking apart certain objects in the game, such as, well, I'll open up that
I can do
that
this.
can of worms a little bit later.
I think it's not safe.
But we sort of, you know, if
Oh,
in
yeah,
watching
little
some games that have multiple characters, like Day of the Tentacle, the actual gameplay of each character is essentially the same. The environments that they're obviously in are very, very different, and the puzzles that they're in are very different, but the
Looks like
gameplay is
this
the
the
same.
only way
So
in.
our idea was really to try to
It's rusted
make
shut.
that gameplay quite different. Sorry. And as you go along in Bone Totem, you'll actually find that the characters get further and further apart, but the idea is that they can sort of share items with each other using their quantum storage device, using their bit of inventory. And the idea of something called a quantum storage device, it actually comes from, so I have a tendency to have to make all the technology that I use in games like sort of make sense, even from a science fiction point of view. So of course you get the infinite pockets that all adventure games actually have. And my idea was to sort of justify how can a character carry the amount of things that they need. And the way to do that was this idea of this sort of device that can create pockets in space and time, and you can hold your objects in there. And then when we were talking about having multiple characters, it was, wouldn't it be cool if that little pocket of space could be shared amongst multiple characters? So that's how we can actually go, and I could, for instance, sort of take this duct tape and actually pass it to other characters, and Charlie could go and take that hinge and actually give it to me, and here Mac can go and twist the hinge back into what he actually needs it to be. Which is fantastic. And now I can go back up here. Open that up. Aside from motion sickness, to not even from games, the reason I love the style of your games. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's quite strange how you know, developers sort of have a bit of themselves in the games. I think definitely the idea of, you know, making games that aren't too motion heavy has been influenced by Nick's motion sickness. Something I'll show you here, and let me actually just move my camera. Can I move my camera a little bit over? Video capture device. There we go. Pop it to the side over there. So we do have a built-in hint system in the game, because a lot of our sort of hint system, or a lot of our puzzles, particularly in the demo, were created from the VO that we had in our very, very first build. We haven't really been able to incorporate the hint system in the demo as much as it will be in the rest of the game. But this is one section where I can show you what it will be like. So over here, Mac needs a hint system, so this will actually pop up in the top right-hand corner here. And if you click that,
I'll need something to pry off this lock.
Too bad we lost our crowbar.
Hey, that seagull was eating my sandwich.
so you'll actually get a bit of a hint as to what you need to do. You need something to actually pry off the lock. Let me just put my camera back there because it just feels right being on the right-hand side. And then I can use the straightened pin that I got from Charlie that was then modified by Mac to actually pry the lock off over here and open the door. He has another question. Who has veto powers if two decision makers disagree? That's actually a really good question. Nick and I, so we are a two-man team in making the games, and then we have a third artist who provides a lot of sort of pre-built assets, and I'll literally just go with a brief, hand it over to Mark, and Mark will come back with, a flare gun, or we need a large electronic turbine or something, which is absolutely fantastic. It just lets us really sort of rapidly build these levels. But in terms of the actual game design, it's very much Nick and very much myself. I suppose both of us would say that we just get our way depending on what the other person says. But what it really comes down to is both Nick and I, we sort of have to try to justify any changes we make to the other person. So usually what happens with me, if I want something done in the game, I tend to actually, I do sort of artistic mock-ups of how I think systems will actually work, or I'll even put videos together, and I'll write out a rationale of why I think certain things should be in the game, and I'll send it through to Nick, often without even telling him that I'm doing it, just on the off chance that he'll look at the thing that I did and get really excited about it. That's very cool over there. And then we sort of we discuss it, and as long as it's good for the game, we sort of have to come to a consensus. I think that definitely because this is our fourth game together, we kind of have a bit of shorthand in talking to each other, and try to figure these things out. So I've got a pretty good idea as to what Nick will actually like, and Nick has a pretty good idea as to what I'll actually like. But it really comes down to just sort of discussing it, and if I can justify why I want something in the game, or if Nick can justify why he wants something in the game and why it'll make the game better, we sort of take it that's the path to actually go down. This game was actually made as a result of me sort of, in my own time, I put together a little demo using Visionaire, actually, and a couple of little art screens, and that's how I sold it to Nick as an idea for our next game. And this was while we were actually working on an active prototype of another game that I really do want to do one day. It was a very cool idea. I think that working with other creative people where you have a common goal to just make the best thing that you can, you can't really let your ego get in the way. You have to just sort of be like, is this going to be the best thing for the game? And luckily for us, or luckily for me, the rest of the time is Nick has actually had my back in the choices that I actually make. There's another question here. What have we learned from the Steam Next Fest and making a demo? That's basically that it's very, very difficult to do. Most games, they sort of exist in a single loop. So as soon as you got your gameplay loop down, then the rest of the game content essentially becomes iteration. And the truth is that the demo for a game is essentially that same gameplay loop. So you have to go and you essentially, although it feels like it's a very small part of the game, so it's like, this is only an hour of gameplay, or half an hour of gameplay, or 2 hours of gameplay over for like a 60-hour game. It's actually sort of like 80% of the work that's gone into just making that hour of gameplay actually work. So having a Steam Next Fest is actually really, really good because it gives you a solid deadline to actually work towards. It gives you a solid sort of like chunk of gameplay that you need to actually get done, which for an indie game can be a really positive thing to actually work within some sort of boundary and structure. That if you just sort of are like just making a game and you kind of get the idea of like, it'll be released when it gets released, you don't have those internal milestones to hit, it can be very easy to sort of get lost in the weeds. So actually having a deadline to work towards, having something like Steam Next Fest where people are going to be looking to play demos and they're looking to actually play your games, it's a really positive thing, and it really does give you something to strive for, and something to work towards. And also I think that people are a bit more forgiving when it comes to the idea of playing demos, and I think on Steam Next Fest specifically, they're sort of like they know that it's a demo, they know that there are things that you are going to change, and you get an amazing amount of feedback that you wouldn't necessarily get in other times. And I definitely think that it's made the game a lot better. It's sort of things where like you sort of implement things that you may only implement in a polished stage at the end of the game, in the last, 2% of finishing a game. You sort of like, you push those things to the foreground of what you're actually doing. And if you can add elements of polish to your gameplay and your UI and the way things are working sort of early on, those things are essentially going to iterate on as the game actually goes forward. So it literally can only get better. I guarantee you, if you were to look at games that have Steam Next Fest demos, and look at games that didn't have the demos, the games that have the demos at release are going to be way more polished and just have much more sort of thought put into it than games that don't. Because it is, you're using this to sell your game, you're using this to sell your idea. So something also I want to go through here is just show that instead of just sort of sharing items amongst each other, characters can also actually share information. So here's a really good example. So can we switch back to Charlie? And if we go to Charlie and we look, so here we need to actually mix some fuel for Mac to actually use. So we can go to fuel, we can take the fuel from Mac and actually load it into the canister here. And when we load up this computer, we've actually got these symbols if we need to actually mix the fuel. So we could try to mix the fuel, but we don't actually know what that'll do. But now if we go back to Mac, you can click the turbine here, and you can see this little symbol over here. So it's on. To be honest, I actually remember this every time I do it. And I'll now go back to Charlie. I can then go and I can mix the fuel. So I think it was that one. I think I can mix the fuel, pass the fuel back to Mac, and then while I'm here, let me actually just repair the damaged hose. And then I can pass that hose back to Mac, switch to Mac, and then get Mac to actually use this. So we definitely sort of wanted to have the idea of it not just sharing items with other characters, but actually sharing information across characters, and really try to push forward the fact that these characters are all working together in this world to try to get out of this situation. It's actually quite interesting because I've been watching quite a few films, and I watch a lot of movies, but something that I've been really responding to lately in films is these sort of movies that have people helping each other. And although you always have sort of like antagonistic relationships in films, the ones that I've really been responding to lately have been ones where people are in a situation, it's a horrible situation, but they're really trying to get out of it, and they're working with each other to try to get out of it. And there's something very appealing about that. And a lot of it may actually be just the fact that the world in the last 3 years has been so crazy, and the idea of writing a story of having characters that are in these horrible situations, but they really are collaborating and helping each other to get out of them. There's something very appealing to me, there's something very appealing about that as an artist. Something I can show you here as well that we've done in the game in terms of the gameplay is you have access to a PDA, and your PDA that you have access to will have your objectives, and then we have a map that you can sort of zoom around and zoom into, and you can see where the characters are in relation to each other. So what you can actually do is, before I actually picked up a PDA, and I can go to the log, and the PDA will not only save the actual images that you've actually come across, but will actually go and come across the actual logs. So here was a log that I read. So if I scroll down here, there was something about where is it? I think it's here, and this is not here, unless I've actually missed it out here. Oh, here we go. Bell maintenance keeps tripping the electrics up here, which inevitably is a pain in my ass. Kurt, do this. Kurt, do that. Kurt, fix this. So I'm going to bypass substation 1 and substation 4. Of course, that could result in catastrophic fire, but that would be someone else's problem. No juice for the entire platform means a vacation for Kurt Dog. So here we see we need to bypass substation 1 and substation 4. So if I close the PDA, and that I will combine with this over here, which is the substation notice, which shows the code that you need for the substation. So AAFGJJAA. So here, by bypassing, I'm just going to leave them blank, and if I change this to FGJJ, I can then press the button. And that may even be something where maybe you get a PDA, another character reads something else on another screen, and then you can actually go and you can use that bit of information that you get. So not only from visual clues, also from clues that are in the PDAs and the written diaries to actually help the characters really solve what's going on and give a bit of clues as to what's going on. We really tried to think of it as they're not three. Spoiler, there will be three characters, but there aren't characters in different spaces. They actually, you are playing as a team going together. Nothing I can do here. Elevator panel. So here I'm still in the security lockdown. So somebody else asked a question, what is the hardest part of making a game? I suppose the answer to that is probably yes. It really is everything. I don't think there's an easy part to making a game. I think legitimately, I mean, from a technical point of view, the hardest part of a game is finishing it. And I know that sounds like a bit of a cop-out answer, but there really is it's such an accomplishment that games are even finished. Just the amount of work that it takes to actually get a bit of interactive digital media out is absolutely insane. But one of the more difficult things to do is just sort of to get that first gameplay loop done. Get it to a point where you're happy with it and you can actually iterate on it and then find where the game actually is. I sort of do... being an artist, I do tend to think of things in terms of like story and art quite early on. So my visual process usually comes from sort of like a very high level design, sort of high concept sort of things. Like what's the game going to look like? What are the characters going to actually be like? And then I sit with Nick and then we start talking about the ideas of gameplay and what we actually want to do. And even sort of, what do we want to do in the genre? Because we love stories and we do love adventure games, but we always want to make certain that we're not just making the same game over and over again. We always want to make certain that our games have something different in them. And in Beautiful Desolation, the idea was to have this large open world, and in Bone Totem, it's now been to sort of have these multiple characters, which we're going to be introduced to my favorite character right now, which is Moses.
My name is
Moses.
and I am
Hopes.
best friend,
You remember me?
Dad.
No, not
So the
that.
voice of Moses in the demo right now is done by Ryan Cooper, who voiced John
Yes.
in the first Stasis.
Captain Mac.
And the part where they say Hope's name and Moses' name is actually the voice of my niece, who
Yes, Captain.
wonderfully lent her incredible vocal talents to help us make the game.
Mum, where is Hope?
Hopes.
So I can definitely talk about the music in the game. So in the first, so we've been incredibly lucky with the musicians that we've actually
do
got
not
to
like
work
water.
with. We got to work with Mick Gordon in Beautiful
Should we
Desolation,
play hide and seek?
which was quite an experience. But when we
Okay,
sort
Mum.
of were talking about doing Stasis, doing a sequel to Stasis, one of the musicians, one of the things I really want to do was hopefully get Mark Morgan back
I'm
to
inside.
actually work
Okay.
on
Now, you need to
Bone
get to the
Totem.
control room. It's
Mark
on the other
Morgan's
side of that overhead.
the music that I sort of associate with Mark Morgan is the first and second Fallout games. They really are just phenomenal musical experiences for me and musical journeys that they went on. And I can hear the Arroyo theme in my head, and it just evokes sort of that desolate landscape. And he actually contacted us for Stasis and said, "Oh, are we looking for a musician?" And of course, I was like, yeah, of course, Mark Morgan's contacting us for the music in the game. But he's just such a cool guy. He's just such an incredible person and so down to earth. And he
This
brought
place
so
smells
much
bad. I would like
life
to
and
go
depth
home
and
now.
warmth to the story of Stasis. So when it came to actually doing Bone Totem, it was, you know,
Kitchens can
we
be
contacted
dangerous
him and we were just
places.
like, could you actually provide even just some score to it? And he provided a lot of music in the game. And he sort of like, we just gave him a really rough idea of kind of what we wanted, where we wanted the story to musically go from an emotional point of view. And he created, it's hard to describe. It's just this sort of like very visceral musical soundscape. So it's definitely music, and you can hear like the tunes and the melody in that, but it's sort of interwoven with these incredibly visceral, almost hard to listen to sounds. And it really sort of it was everything that we could have wanted from a soundtrack and more. And then we actually took that music and we sort of mixed it into the ambient sounds that we actually go. I'm not a musician, I'm not a composer, but you know, professionally, I don't know what I'm professionally, I'm a game artist. But we sort of took the stems that he actually gave us and sort of wove them into the ambient tracks that we actually have, and everything sort of comes together to create something that really is quite unique. And then one of the things that we actually did, in talking earlier, I was talking about like, you know, if one of us comes up with an idea, how do we get the other person to do it? And I had this idea of a sound system that was almost based on sort of each character having their own sort of musical track, but that's a difficult thing to do when you sort of are switching so often. You know, we've got 3 characters, and the idea is that you're always supposed to be switching from one character to another. So the sound system we actually have that Nick designed, it's the same
I'm in the
basic
control
melody,
room.
and as you switch to characters, the actual instruments that play the melody actually
Am I
change,
allowed to do
and
that?
it's super subtle. So Moses has this almost toy box sound to it, and then Mac has kind of like a guitar, like a heavy metal guitar, playing his music, and then Charlie has, I think Charlie has pianos and violins. And then as we go on in the game, the music will change to the actual areas that they're in, and trying to get as much emotion out of where they are, and give each area, as the characters get further and further apart, make certain that each area has its own unique sound and feel to it. And that's something that has been fun to work on and a fun idea to actually work through. So this is something I can also show you with Moses. So while our other 2 characters that we have, they've, you know, Mac can sort of break things and Charlie can fix things, and Moses is a character, because he's a toy bear, he can actually hack into computer systems. So if you come across a computer system, chances are Moses will actually be able to break into it. And that was also quite a fun thing to actually play with the characters, because ideally we'll get to certain parts in the game where you need a character's skill, but they're not there, and then you get that frustration of like, oh, if only I had this you know, person here to actually help me out. And that's definitely something that we're going to play with as you get further into the game, to really show how important these characters are in the way that they actually work with each other. And here we're going to have one of my favorite moments that I've written, and this is where Moses tries to talk to the dead body.
Hello, my name is...
Moses.
What is your name? It's okay if you don't want to talk. Sometimes it's nice to just be quiet.
Absolutely love that. I think it encapsulates his character to a T.
This is not safe to eat.
The idea with Moses is all of his sort of, you know, he sort of views the world like a child would. And because he was a super toy, the idea is that he would be almost like a babysitter for children. So he'll be sort of oblivious to the violence that's going on around him, but also very, very concerned with safety. And here we also have some of the more sort of gross parts of the game, but we have to have our weird biomechanical puzzles. of tearing out the bionic heart, passing that to Mac, and letting Mac rip out the power source, and then I can pass that power source over to Charlie, and then have Charlie use the power source with the implants to make a powered implant. So that's a really good example of the characters actually working together to try to solve a problem and get something done. Another question here: how will the voice and dialogue change in the final game? That's also a really good question. So what I like to do with Nick sort of like encouraging it as well is the idea of leaving the final written word and the dialogue is probably one of the last things that we actually do in the game. And something that a lot of developers will actually talk about, and one of the scariest things in game development is basically when you lock your localization. And that's because like once your once your VO is locked and once your writing is locked, to actually make any changes is so difficult. And there's a massive amount of changes that you kind of want to get done at the end of a game when you're doing playtesting and when you're starting to get feedback. And dialogue and characters is one of those things that's sort of like it's an easy way to basically ensure that people don't get stuck in certain parts of the game, especially with a puzzle game. So we've sort of left the dialogue and VO to the last part of the process, so we can really tweak and change the writing as we actually go along. So when we did the VO for the demo, we very much sort of like we wrote the dialogue and I gave it to the actors and they sort of did like
Hey,
cold
Moses,
reads and they gave it back to us,
gonna
did an
need your help
amazing
here.
job. But it wasn't necessarily directed by us. It was more just sort of like, give us your interpretation of these characters and give us your interpretation of what you actually want to do with it. So I think when we go to the final VO, I'll probably be a bit more picky. If any of the voice artists are watching this, I'm very sorry in advance. But I'll probably be a lot more sort of like hands-on in terms of the directing
skeleton
phase and what
looks
emotions we need out of things.
deformed.
And also, it can be quite difficult for actors to sort of act in a vacuum. They've got a script and they've got a screenplay, and they're kind of like
No,
they're just sort of lines, but they may not know
this is old.
where the
Very
character's actually
old.
going to be going. And some actors, particularly I know Ryan likes to make a character, and I think knowing what the complete arc of a character is quite important to him. So having the entire screenplay sort of like done and locked and finished, and to the point where we are literally just sort of like polishing, is really important, and I think it's going to make a massive difference to the actual final experience. And also what we can do as well is we can add
Looks
little
like it's from
dialogue
some
clues
sort
in,
of
and we can actually
museum.
sort of change the way the characters will react to certain things, because they'll know, or we'll know where we actually want to take them in the story, and it frees us up to be able to make any changes that we actually want as we're actually moving forward. So here, I've actually forgotten how to do this. So here we can actually, what part of the puzzle is this here? Oh, okay, so I know where we are. So let me go to the PDA, and it was 180, and then I think there was another bit of here. One 809. There we
Good
go.
girl, Charlie.
And if I put the data disk in here, this is actually quite fun. We're just trying to sort of have these sort of like technical puzzles, these beautiful sort of zoomed in vignettes that we actually have, and trying to make certain that it sort of looks like technology that could be realistic. Something that I love to do whenever I build these scenes is to try to think, if I was making a 1980s, alien or aliens style science fiction movie, a lot of that stuff was built using pre-made things. So they would go to a junkyard and they'd find a ship engine, or old. I think famously, James Cameron used helicopter engines, like defunct helicopter engines, for the back of the cryostasis pods in Aliens. And even when I build this stuff, I go and I try to find assets, and I'm like, oh, so this over here, you can actually see this sort of like this microwave that I've actually gone, and we sort of had the door slide over with a bit of a technical thing. And this to me is the kind of thing that if they were making, if Bone Totem was a film being done in the 80s or the 90s, this is the kind of thing that they would have done. They would have gone to a junkyard, they would have found some cool kitchen stuff, an old computer, a bread maker, and they would have taken it, added some pipes into it, and actually turned it into a prop. So we really do try to sort of think of these things as though they were props that artists are actually making to get stuff done, which is something that I'm sure that a lot of artists actually do use. But being that we're a very small team, kit bashing is really important to us, and I just sort of use the idea of kit bashing these things together. And instead of it being seen as a disadvantage, I actually see it as a major advantage in terms of our actual look and aesthetic. And it's the way that you can get that really awesome 80s and 90s feel to your science fiction work. It's just think like, what are the things that inspire you about those things? And that's how we've managed to have our games. They still feel unique, but they definitely have that sort of like kit bashed aesthetic. Let's go here. So this is, a part of doing the first part of the game, and it's one of the challenges in actually doing it, is treating it as a tutorial level and trying to show people like how are you actually going to play the game. So this was definitely knowing that you can go back to certain puzzles and undo what you actually did. So here Mac went to where he first actually went. You can pull out the fuse. You can actually run through. Something we haven't spoken about are these cool little balls over here, obviously inspired by Prometheus, the mapping drones. And Nick did such a cool job with the little tendrils that actually spike out and scan things. And I think that there are sort of like spots that they will gravitate towards, and then the actual scanning hands will come out and actually scan certain objects and that. And those are definitely going to come into play a little bit later on in the game, as they sort of are feeding the characters information on where to go and what to do. So here I can use power cell there. Let me just check on my Twitter if there are any other questions actually come through. Logan Rogers Folis, what gives you inspiration for the puzzles? The art has obvious roots. Yes, the art. I'm super subtle in my artistic roots for these things. Go 1970s sci-fi. In terms of the puzzles, sure, I've never really thought of where sort of like puzzle inspiration comes from. I suppose it's just what works in the world, what works in the game. I think as soon as we've set up the actual rules of the world and how the puzzles work, then it's just a case of sort of playing it through, talking through it, and then making certain that it makes sense in the world. I really like weird things, so for Bone Totem, I looked at, there's a Cronenberg movie called Existence. I think it's Cronenberg. Yes, it is Cronenberg. Wait, is it Cronenberg? I'm going to have to Google this and actually find out. I don't want to be attributing the work to somebody else. But there's these awesome sort of like weird biological things where like the guy makes a gun out of like a chicken bone. I think it's called like the gristle gun. And it's got this super visceral feel to it. And that stuff, and also the look of things like the Matrix, and the weird biomechanical nature of things, and trying to find like really cool visuals and almost like build puzzles around them, or literally just it could be a thing of like talking about it through Nick. We often have what we used to call like sugar packet development, where we literally we go and have a cup of coffee and literally taking like packets of sugar and then working out the puzzles with packets of sugar. Okay, this over here is a bullet from a gun. This is the gunpowder you get out of it. Then you combine this with this to get that. In terms of puzzle inspiration, I also try to make certain that it's something that it's got to sound cool when you explain it. It can't be boring. Like this over here, you turn on the minigun and it blasts through the elevator. So that's something that we really try to do, is really make certain that the puzzles sound cool when we're talking about them. If it sounds cool when we're talking about them, chances are it's actually going to be cool when we implement them, and the player should have that moment of like,
Mum, I'm here.
that was
Okay,
fun
Moses.
to actually do.
I need you to override the terminal
Another
and
question here:
find
what
the
should a
wall.
developer know before making an indie game project? Take however long you think it's going to be to make it, and double that, and probably double that again, and then take the budget that you think you need to go to actually make that, and double that again, and take how big you want to make the game, and halve that again, and that's basically will get you a good indie game. The basic thing is just that games will take a lot longer than you think they actually will. So sort of be prepared to get to the point where you're like, why did I do this? Why is this taking so long? But also, I think an important thing is do the groundwork before you actually do your game. Try to get a prototype out as fast as possible. We built the Bone Totem prototype. I think it was 3 months for us to build the initial prototype to get to sort of like demo level, which had VO, it had character models, it had switching, it had these sort of like few basic levels. The entire idea was there, and we got that out as fast as possible. And then the rest of it is essentially then iteration on that idea. And there's also certain things that you can definitely do when you're making a game, particularly like a narrative game, is construct your narrative in such a way that you're able to actually take chunks out of it without breaking the game. And this, it's advice that it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, like, oh, build something that you can like rip it up to pieces, because technically if you remove one part of the story it shouldn't actually work. But in games, you honestly might not have the luxury of being able to actually just sort of like let your story play out. You might get to the point where you're like, I need to cut a third of this game out. How am I actually going to do it? So when you're writing your actual story, make certain you have a very strong beginning and a very strong end, and try to think of the middle almost as like a concertina that you can expand and contract as you actually need, depending on your budget and depending on what you actually want to do. And I promise you, if you have that ending in mind, you have that ending in mind from early days, and everything that you do is essentially working towards that ending, your game project and how you actually put it together and everything, it will feel organic. It won't feel like you cut moments out of it. It'll feel sort of like you want it to be as much of an invisible process as possible.
Rest in peace, buddy. Rest in peace.
Also love that line. That line is a bit of a callback to the original Stasis, where John says something very similar, where he comes across a dead body. I'm all about callbacks. I will have as many callbacks as I can to games and to projects, and I'm fully okay with actually calling back and referencing my own work.
Jeez. Maybe it was a shark attack. Jaws or something.
And that.
So I can tell you, even the little portraits that I actually have in the top left-hand corner of the character portraits, those are also rendered in Unreal. So something that I think, and something that I've actually learned a lot, particularly with Bone Totem, is not being afraid to mix and match different techniques and ways to actually get things done as an artist. Sometimes you tend to find one direction and go in it, and I'm an architectural artist by trade mostly, so a lot of our stuff was really sort of focused on the architecture and the structure of the world, and I think that being able to branch out the different tools and different ways of doing things, and find those shortcuts, find the things that you can actually do to try to get your project done and get it out of the day. At the end of the day, having a finished game, having a finished product is the most important thing to actually do. It really is paramount, is just making certain that you can get your game out. And if that means cutting corners, if that means finding ways to, like for example, using Unreal as a renderer, is a really important thing, because essentially it means that I could actually do real-time production, and I didn't have to
This
worry
thing is
about
huge.
having to
It
actually
looks like it can take an
you know,
enormous
put something on
amount
a
of
render
pressure.
farm
How
and
far
leaving
down
it
do you
for,
reckon they were going?
you know,
With
in
equipment
some
like
cases
this?
3 or 4 days not having
Deep.
access to a computer
Very
while it
deep.
renders. So we outlaid a bit of cash to actually get the computer to the way we actually wanted it, but actually having that bit of freedom to actually do that, to be able to make changes and be as agile as we can with cinematics is a really, really important part of indie development.
I've unlocked the terminal, Mum.
He got it working. We can go down.
So this, when you actually play the
Mac,
game and
there
you'll
could
get to
be
this
people
last
down there.
part,
Survivors.
there's always
Then
the
let
thing
the
of how
authorities
do
take
you,
care of
you
it.
know, why do
We search
people
and rescue.
Mac,
go
we've gotta
into
make
these
sure this is a clean
dark
salvage.
scenarios
If there
in
are
horrors?
people
You always
down
are
there,
like, don't go into the
will-
room, don't
we
get to
will
the room
help
and
where
that.
we can and send out
And
a
this was sort of
mayday.
like trying
But
to
if we
write this
call this in
conversation
now,
was actually really
and there are
difficult.
people down there,
To explain why they
we
were
lose
actually doing
everything
what they're
here.
doing. But I will
This
say,
is it.
in my
A
mind,
once in a
I've rewritten this
lifetime
conversation
opportunity.
entirely.
Gotta be a reward
There
or
are certain
something.
spoilers
like
in
to
the
go
demo,
home now.
but
I do not like it
there
here.
are things that
I'm with the
even if you play the
toy.
demo and
We
you
go
play the
down,
final game,
we take a look, we come back
certain
up,
things
stake
have
our claim.
changed.
That's it.
And
Down.
I think I can leave it at that. I don't want to spoil.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil
Down
too
and then
much.
back up.
Okay. Let's do it.
Everyone, I just want to say I think my time is coming up. It's coming to an end. The last part of this extra is actually playing here. I just want to say thank you very much for joining me. Those of you that are here, I've got a couple of hundred people. That's pretty cool. Hope I haven't bored you too much with any of my talking about this game. We really are. I could go on and I could talk about Stasis and I could talk about our development styles and I could talk about our games just ad infinitum. It really is an absolute passion project for Nick and myself, and I'm so grateful every day that I can actually sit and work on this. And I think that if we can give a bit of joy to people, even if you just play the demo and you think like the demo is actually awesome, that's more than enough for us. But of course, if you could, please do wishlist the game. We are going to be releasing. Actually, no, I'm not going to give anything on release dates. I can just imagine Nick going like, "No, don't say anything." But the game is very, very far along in production. Our release date is set for Q4 of this year, and I think that Bone Totem is going to be an incredible experience and something that it's going to be special. I think it's going to be special, and I really do hope that you'll join us on this journey, and it's going to be a fun one. So thank you very, very much. I really appreciate you guys coming and spending time with me. I was talking to Nick here. Nick was literally saying, no, don't say anything. So yeah, I'm not committing to anything, I can promise you that. But if you guys can, please come and join us in our Discord to ask any questions that we actually have. Please hit me up on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @StasisGame. The Discord can be found linked from our website, thebrotherhoodgames.com. You can join us on our Facebook, send us an email, chat to us here. You can even say anything on our in our discussion board here on Steam. We'll be happy to actually talk to you, happy to answer any questions that anybody has. And even if you've got certain things like how to get into game development, how did we actually get it? If you've got any questions, please don't hesitate, send us an email. As I said, chat to us in our Discord, ask us questions on Twitter, ask us questions on our board over here, and we'll help wherever we can. I just want to say thank you very much to everybody. This has been absolutely fantastic, and I'm going to get my OBS here. I'm going to hit, I think I've got like 30 more seconds, so let me duck out before the 30 seconds is over. Thanks very much. I appreciate everything that everybody's done for us, and hopefully we'll see you soon.